You're listening to Lucid Cafe. I'm your host, Wendy Halley. Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of Lucid Cafe, a podcast exploring healing, consciousness, and the complexities of being human. So, I want to talk about the time thing. It's definitely speeding up. I think I lost a week somewhere. No idea where it went. So if you find a missing week, let me know. Thanks. All right, I've got another really good episode for you, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce her name correctly with my American accent. My guest, Karen Docherty, is a psychic medium and mentor from across the pond in Scotland. In this episode, Karen shares how she's been connecting with the spirits of folks who've died for a long time to help grieving loved ones bring calm and clarity to their lives. We talk about her work and how she mentors others to help develop their understanding of psychic connections and self-development, spirit communication, and the mechanics of mediumship itself. So please enjoy my conversation with Karen Docherty. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So I am curious about your work. You refer to yourself as a psychic medium, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So what is your definition of that? Let's start there.
Okay, so a psychic medium is someone that bridges, I suppose, the gap between this world and the spirit world that we can't see. That's the mediumistic side of things. The psychic side of things is more about me connecting with the spirit or the higher self or soul of the person in front of me in this world. So psychic and mediumistic are two different things, but the reason I use psychic medium is because I do both.
Beautiful. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if other psychic mediums would describe their work in that way. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think there's so much, there's so many different kind of words out there that can be used, and there's a lot of people that might say intuitive mediumship, or some people don't like the word psychic, which I don't understand, but I think in many years ago, psychic was seen as something totally different, whereas for me and for many other mediums, we know that it's just all connected, it's all energy, it's just understanding the difference in which energy you're connecting with.
Right. Yeah. And that's a bit of a discipline, huh?
It sure is. And I think that when people come to see me for readings, you're always going to connect on a psychic level first and foremost, because you're connecting with that person who stands in front of you. And then connecting with them psychically then allows you to know who they are and build up that energy and build up that reading from there before you connect with their loved ones who have crossed over. So for me anyway, I will always do both. And sometimes people will come with life problems. So it's not necessarily about, having to connect with someone that they've lost. It might be about their job, their family, money, houses, all the life stuff that we have to deal with here. Some people just come purely for that. They need a little bit of direction or guidance. So that would purely be a psychic reading in that way.
Right. So you're like one-stop shopping.
Basically, yes. And, the thing is, when you look at it like that, there are mediums out there. Well, all mediums out there are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums.
Right.
Because some psychics only do the psychic work. They only link to this side of life and what's going on here. So someone might do tarot cards or use a tool like a crystal ball or colours, or there are many different ways of doing that, but that's usually purely a psychic link, and they might never go into the mediumistic side of it, whereas as a medium you are doing both all the time.
No, that makes perfect sense. Do you use any tools when you're doing your work? Any kind of divination tools, or are you just tuning in?
Yeah, I just tune in. I mean, I've obviously over the years you experimented with tarot cards and crystals and all of this, but I just have always found that my work is at its best when I just sit in the moment, tune in and see what comes. And that is the way that I work. And it's surprising how many people actually ask for cards or for crystal ball or rune stones, because I think that there's a misconception that that means that someone is connecting somehow. Like, even if, for an example, someone will say to me, how do you read for someone online, like in a video scenario where it's Zoom or whatever it might be? How can you do that if they're not in the same room? And I think people just don't understand that I'm connecting with their energy and their soul, so they don't have to be in the same room as me. And likewise, I don't need a tool to do that. But there are many gifted readers out there that are fabulous at using cards and such like, but it's just never been for me.
Right. I think everyone who does that work, they have to find their way, right? It sounds like you're just a straight shot. Let's just dive in.
Yeah, yeah.
So, speaking of diving in, I imagine you've been asked this question a zillion times. I suspect that you noticed these gifts as a child. Is that true?
Yes, it is true that I noticed that there was something different, but I didn't know that it meant I was a medium. So as I grew up and I would see spirit people in my grandmother's house, for instance, and I would always tell her that there's a woman in the living room or in the kitchen, and my grandmother would always just say the same thing to me: the dead don't harm you. So she knew straight away it was spirit that I was seeing, but she didn't make a big deal of it. There was no long conversation about it. So for me, I knew that maybe my sisters weren't seeing the same thing as me, but I just felt like it was natural to me. So I didn't question it. It wasn't until later in life when it actually became very overwhelming, particularly at night time when I would go to bed and I would hear lots of people speaking in my ear, lots of spirit people speaking. It was very overwhelming. And at that point, I went and spoke to a medium about it. And then it was the medium that said to me that I had to develop. And it was because I was mediumistic, which I still didn't believe at that point. But the more I ventured into it, the more I realized that it was something that I had to do.
Well, it's interesting that it sounds like all of a sudden they were like, Karen, hello, wanting to
Mm-hmm.
connect with you.
That's exactly right. You've just said it the way it is. Spirit will try to get your attention. If it's the right thing and it's the right time for it to be happening, they will become much more intense with that connection, really just to get your attention. Because when I then started to develop the mediumship, it's like it all went silent. And I remember saying to my teacher at the time, well, I don't think I should come anymore because I'm not really hearing them the same way that I did before. And it was her that said to me, yes, because they now have your attention. And so they don't need to be as overwhelming as that. So it is actually the correct way to describe it.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I had a colleague in my shamanic training who she said she had mediumistic gifts as well. And she said that it would get so loud in the middle of the night that what she did was call office hours and with them. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was really clever and cute.
Absolutely. And she's so right. And I think, though, we'll have to remember that spirit will always respect your decisions. So if I say to spirit, if it doesn't happen often, but if a spirit person does come in when I'm not working, whether it's during the night or some other time, if I say I'm not working just now, you'll have to come back or we'll connect another time. They do. They're very respectful of the fact that you are doing this work and that you are a medium. And actually, mediums know that we connect all the time. It's just the awareness that changes. So if I'm doing something in life, like speaking to the kids or, just doing normal everyday things, I can switch my awareness to spirit really easily because they're always there. But I choose not to because I'm not working at that moment. So it's not that they're intruding, it's just that they are there anyway, and our awareness as mediums gravitates towards them.
Would you liken it to turning a dial, like where your focus is going? So your focus is in the physical world. doing your dishes, hanging out with your kids or whatever. And then when you have a client come, you turn your focus into the realm of information or the spirit world or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're in both places at the same
Yep.
time.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Like you can still perceive what's going on in the physical world, but you're also getting information. So it's like a really highly focused way of working.
Yes. Yeah, you've described it again perfectly, where it is about, because obviously when a client comes, you want to connect with them too. So you can't just kind of close your eyes and then not look at that person
Right.
or not be connected to them. So you have to be aware of them, and you also have to be aware of spirit. So it's the same in any circumstance, where if I'm doing the dishes, like you say, and I tune in or turn my awareness to them, turn that dial, then they are there and I can feel them and hear them and see them, but I'm also in the room doing the dishes. So it's the same connection, but it's a different frequency. And I think that it's the easiest way to describe it, because some people talk about switching it on and off, turning it on and off, or opening up and closing down. And I think that there's many different ways to say things, but sometimes I think that, well, definitely from teaching for as long as I've been teaching now, that confuses students. Like my students have often said, well, what do I need to do to open up and then close down? And I tend to say, don't think about it like that. Think about it like you're just changing your awareness to your space, because they are there. So you don't have to worry about that. And I think it just makes it a little bit easier for people to understand.
Yeah, like this idea that all of these realities exist simultaneously. It's there for us at any time, is what it sounds like you're saying. It's just a matter of, again, tuning your focus to a particular, for lack of a better way of describing it, level of reality.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that, I mean, I'm not saying that people should go about constantly being aware of the spirit side of things, because we have to live this life and we have to be grounded enough to do that and go through this life. That is why we are here. But also at the same time, as someone who is naturally connected to spirit and can feel energy and where that connection is, sometimes that's harder to switch that off, and you've got to work at switching, like turning away from that almost, because it becomes very tempting to stay in that space for longer, because it's such a beautiful space to be and it's so lovely. And I know that sometimes when I've done meditation, sometimes when I know it's time to come back from that, I'm like, just let me stay here a little bit longer, because you're coming back to this reality, and sometimes life's tough.
Sometimes, yeah, it's a tough gig, I would say. I mean, all of us have experiences of difficulty at some point. But when you're connecting with someone who's died, for example, how do you perceive them?
So when I connect with them, I normally feel them first. So that's clairsentience, and that's about opening up and connecting with that spirit through feeling, emotion. And really, when they step forward to me and I blend with them, I can feel everything about them. I can feel their personality. I can feel their characteristics. I can feel how they look, which seems strange. I can feel maybe how they passed. I can feel their connection to their children, if they have children here. So everything happens through feeling first and foremost, but very quickly after that, I might see things as well. It doesn't happen the same every single time, because every communicator from the spirit side communicates differently. So they are going to work with the faculty of my mediumship that's easiest for them to work with. So some of them might let me see things. Some of them will show me things through their own eyes. Other ones will just show me images or almost like sketches of things. Other ones will let me hear them. So it can vary all the time. But the main part of mediumship for me is the clairsentience, which is feeling them.
So you get a really kind of holistic picture that way that you can interpret.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's important as well to realise that when they communicate, like as an example, I remember communicating with one of my clients' mother in spirit. Now, I had never met my client before. It was her first visit. And I got lots of things through the feeling aspect, through visual aspect. All of the things I was giving her were correct. And then all of a sudden I heard the mum speak Italian. Now, I don't understand
Uh-oh.
Italian. I don't speak Italian, right? But it was enough to make me say to my client, your mother's speaking Italian. She must have been Italian. And she said, yes, she didn't speak a word of English. So that was evidence in itself, because the mother was able to let me hear that. And it wasn't about what she was saying. It was just her way of getting that evidence to me that she was Italian. But of course, in the spirit side of things, they don't need a language. So when they're communicating everything else to me, it's through thought. Everything's through thought. So language doesn't come into it, because my mind would interpret something the way I'm supposed to interpret that. So it sounds a little bit confusing, but basically it just shows from the clairaudience side of things, the clear hearing, it can make such a difference to the evidential material that's coming forward as well.
That's a really cool example. I love that. Because that would be a bit challenging, right? To hear a language that you're not familiar with. And gee, what if it's a language that you don't even know what language it
Don't
is?
know. Yeah, I mean, exactly. But the thing about mediumship as well is, although let's say it was a language that I had never heard and that I didn't recognize within my own frame of reference to call upon, the spirit side of life would still find a way to show me something in recognition with that, because they know what they're doing. So they know how my mind will interpret that evidence. So they would still find that. And another example as well is when you need an interpreter for a reading. That can be challenging because you've got to slow everything down. So I've read for people in Japan, and the one example I'm thinking of, the gentleman had an interpreter with him, and so I had to say something, and then the interpreter repeated it to them in Japanese, and then I had to wait for the answer for that to see if it was correct information. So that can be challenging, because mediumship's a flow. Everything comes through a flow with my mediumship. So it can be quite quick at times, other times at a level where it's definitely understood. You're definitely allowing the client time to process. But when it's interpretation through a third party, you really have to slow that down a lot. It still works. It works amazingly well, but it takes time to get used to that.
Yeah, that sounds like advanced reading.
Yes. Because I think in the early days, of course, with students of mine, I've said to them, that they could be called upon to do that. And you can see the look of panic on their face. And I said,
Oh, I bet.
yeah, once you do it once or twice, you get into your own way of doing it. And the biggest thing is just trusting your mediumship. The spirit world wouldn't put you in that position if you were not able to do that. So I always if I've ever had doubts throughout my journey where I've thought, oh, wow, this is going to be challenging in some respect, I always revert to the same thing. Spirit wouldn't put me there if I wasn't supposed to do that. So I put my trust in them fully.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The trust piece. Did you have times earlier in your apprenticeship, I guess, of doing this where you had a lot of doubt about what you were perceiving?
I think that came for me really early on, before I realized that I was a medium. So when I first went into this home circle that I talked about earlier, and when I first spoke to the medium and she said I had to develop, I didn't believe her. I respected her and I went along because she asked me to go along. But it wasn't until I got asked, okay, just sit for a moment and then give the other person whatever comes to you. So I was just kind of following orders at that point. And I remember closing my eyes and I remember the information that I got, and I just said it like it was. And the girl that I was speaking to was quite astounded, and she was like, oh yeah, that's correct, and this is my mother and all this, and she verified all of the information. It was at that point that I felt like, oh, this is something. So for me, it wasn't about so much doubting that connection, it was about doubting me as a person to be able to do this. But when that happened, the penny dropped, and in that moment I remember feeling, this is what I'm supposed to do. I feel like I'm home. And I always use that word home because that is actually how it felt. It was almost like in an instant, everything made sense.
Mm.
Every little thing in my life had made sense about the spirit side of things. So from that moment on, I never doubted spirit and what they could do. Were there times where I was nervous about certain events or a big crowd of people coming to see me? Or yeah, of course, because you're human too. And in that moment you think, oh wow, I hope I can fulfill what I'm supposed to do here. But the minute I start speaking about spirit, I'm with them, absolutely with them. So then that any doubt or nervousness or anything else just goes, because I know spirit and I know my connection there.
That's very cool. You're the only other person I've ever heard describe opening those doors and it feeling like home. I had a similar experience when I opened the shamanic doors. It just like everything made sense in a way that I couldn't even put words to. It was just like, all right,
Yeah.
this all makes perfect sense to me. And I started feeling very excited, even though I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what the hell I was doing or where I was going with it or what it was going to look like. But it just felt like things just clicking into place.
Yeah, it's like almost like you can imagine cogs and
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
fitting into the right place. And like you said, it's not even about knowing where you're going with that or what you're going to do with that. Although in the early days, I remember going to a different group to practice the mediumship, and the teacher at that time, I had never met her before, and she said, right, I'm going to start going around the group, and there was only about maybe 6 people, and she said, I'm going to start going around the group and asking where you think your mediumship will take you or what you will do with your mediumship. So she started on the right hand side and I was sitting at her left hand side. So the whole time when people were talking about it, I couldn't wait for her to come to me, because I
I know.
absolutely knew. I absolutely knew. I was like, I know I'm going to be doing events like demonstrating mediumship, doing a lot of good, like charity work and this and that and the next thing, and just fulfilling my whole life with this. And I was so excited. And as she came to me, she said, oh yes, Karen. And I was like, yes, ready to tell her everything. And she said, oh no, I'm not even asking you. We all know what you're going to be doing with it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. So I never got to say it, but I guess she was tuned in.
That's
I
pretty
guess she was
funny.
tuned in. Yeah, well, I was so, in that moment, if you'd have seen my face, I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
really wanted to
A
talk
little
about this.
devastated. Yeah.
Yeah, but she said to me, like a few months later when I met her again through something else, she said, I knew when I seen you and when you sat in that group what you were going to be doing with your mediumship, so we didn't need to worry about it. Which is, in a way, it's such a vote of confidence for my work, which I appreciated.
Right. I wonder how your colleagues felt because they didn't get that same kind of vote of confidence.
I think that's the thing. And I'll tell you the truth, and this is what I say to all my students as well when I talk with them. Everyone develops at a different time, a different place, a different energy about it. I think that sometimes we can hold ourselves back if we feel like we should be at a certain level. When I sat in circle, my work came really quickly. My first teacher, she said to me, you'll be in circle for 2 years. And I said, okay, that's fine. I was ready to commit to that. I was so looking forward to it. And within sort of 4 months, she said to me, it's time for you to leave the group. And
Okay. You're
I
good.
said to her, well, I don't want to. That was my comfort blanket. That was where I sat and practiced. I was part of something finally that kind of was all to do with spirit. And I didn't want to leave. And she said, no, you have to go and do the work now. And I said, well, I don't think I'm ready for that. She said, oh no, you're ready for that. So she pushed me. And I knew, obviously I know now why she done that. But at the time, I felt like that I wasn't ready for that to happen. But what happened with the other students then was that they felt a little bit like, well, why is Karen getting to leave and do that? And why am I not ready for this? And I spoke to, and we stayed good friends with them all, but we spoke afterwards, and I said, I don't have an answer. The only answer I can give is that this is my path and that's your path, and I'm sure we will both meet at some point, but that's just the way it is. And so I tell my students all the time, like, don't be worried about someone else's journey. Don't be worried about what they do or what they don't do. because there's always going to be a million people out there that do it differently. I've met lots of mediums that I am inspired by and that I watch their work, and they're maybe like worldly famous mediums, but it just inspires me. It just makes me feel like, oh yeah, I love good mediumship. I love great mediumship. So I encourage people to use it as an inspiration rather than anything else.
I wanted to talk a little bit about everyone's capacity to access their intuitive sides and that it would manifest in different ways. So how do you usually address that topic with the folks that you work with?
So, we are all psychic. When we come here, we are all psychic because we have come from spirit. We in the spirit side of things, we communicate by thought. So when we come here, we can still do that. We can still pick up on thoughts and energy. But as we grow up, we lose that ability to certain degrees. Now, we will all hang on to our psychic ability in certain degrees too. So it might be where someone that seems to be very intuitive, and then someone else is like, they're a little bit, they've got a hunch now and then, but it doesn't come to much more than that. So we all have that. So we can all develop psychically. Every one of us can develop our psychic ability to where it's supposed to be. That doesn't mean I would say to someone they're supposed to develop psychically to then become a medium. It just means that we can all develop psychically. When we are mediums, we are born mediums. It's a very natural thing. It's there. It's always been there. So then you develop that aspect of it, which is kind of completely different than developing the psychic side of things. But either way, we can all tap into something. So I would never say to someone not to do this. If someone came to me and said, I want to be mentored by you and I want to develop psychic ability, I would absolutely welcome that. If I thought that it was for their good and something that they needed, I would help them with that. But there are other people that will come and say they're communicating with spirit already, and what do they do about that? And they're frightened or they're overwhelmed. And then in that case, I would help them develop the mediumship side of things. So I think it's important to realize that we all do have a level that we will go to. It's like saying someone who comes to a singing teacher saying, I want you to teach me how to sing like Beyonce. Well, not everyone's going to have that ability to sing like Beyonce, but that singing teacher could absolutely help bring the best out in what they can do and what their abilities are. So it's much like that.
It's a good analogy. What do you think at this point in your career of working with folks and teaching them, what do you think actually is what's getting in the way of any of us accessing our psychic abilities?
I think just life. I think that there's a lot of conditioning in life. From the minute we are born here, we are conditioned, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. We are conditioned to believe certain things. We are conditioned to react in certain ways. Someone, for instance, who has been through, let's say, some trauma in their life will react differently than someone who hasn't had that same trauma. Someone that maybe has had hurdles to get over, but they're okay with it and it's normal life stuff, they will react completely differently. So it might be that their minds are clearer. And it depends on what goes on in your life. You might have a very busy life. You might have 3 kids and a job and a husband or a wife or a partner that you need to consider. So it might be that you don't have enough energy or time left on your hands at the end of a week to then sit and say, right, I want to develop this now. So I think that there's many different factors that come into it. But the one thing I will say is that if someone really wants to develop, they will. They will find the time. And remember, when I say that, it's not that I'm saying, well, it's up to you to put the time aside on its own, because I think that spirit have a plan for people, like if someone has that ability and they haven't yet developed it, like myself, I didn't develop this until later on. I was really definitely maybe late teens, thereabouts, when I started to look at this. That was meant. My life before that was in a completely different place and I had my own things to get through. So I think it will come at the right time, but if you feel the movement to do it, then it's down to you to do that.
I was wondering if maybe our civilization collectively is less open to this and I'm making a huge assumption here. Keep that in mind, little disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know, I would describe it like as us being top heavy, like the center of our beings, for the most part, it seems like we're in our heads or even above our heads.
Mm-hmm.
I learned this in martial arts when I was learning to Tai Chi spar, and the idea of your center. If your center's in your head, there's a lot of mental activity going on and a lot of what I would call noise, right? I know in my own experience, and I don't know if this is true for you, which is why I'm bringing it up because I'm curious about your thoughts, is if you have a really busy mind, that it can be harder to perceive what's going on the other side, because you have to kind of sort through all of that
Mm-hmm.
noise, all those thoughts. I guess what I'm wondering is you don't perceive with your brain or your mind. I think that that's the part of you that interprets, but you're perceiving with a different part of yourself.
Yeah.
It's deeper. And I think
Yeah.
that's what trips up a lot of people, at least from where I sit anyway. So any thoughts on any
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that, especially in today's society, the way it is, I mean, we're very connected to technology. Our minds are always busy. If you have a spare 10, 15 minutes on a lunch break, for instance, you go on your phone. Like, it's just constant. The level of connection to everything in this life is constant. And you really, to make a connection to the psychic side of things or spirit side of things, you have to have that time where you're not doing that downtime, that time where you're only connecting with your inner self. And that's why people talk about meditation. But even with meditation, it doesn't mean that you have to sit in the quiet in a dark room. You could be meditating as you walk around the park. You could be meditating when you're doing the dishes, just kind of go into that slightly altered state. It has to be where you almost dull the world away from your mind. And you're right to say your mind does interpret the information, and the connection is on a deeper level. It's a soul connection, so it's a completely different connection than the mind. But unless we clear out the mind to a degree or quieten the mind down, then we're never going to know that, and we're never going to feel that or hear that, because we are constantly in our head.
Well said. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your mediumship practice, because I think that's a very powerful thing, and I think that's probably what people want to hear a little bit more about.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of benefits can someone receive from connecting with a loved one who's died?
So the thing that comes out first and foremost is the healing aspect of things. So whether someone comes to me they've just lost someone, so they're in the throes of grief and they need to know where their loved one is. If that loved one comes forward, which 99.9% they do, to make that connection, then the client will leave knowing where they are, knowing that things have settled, and in turn that gives them some healing. It gives them a connection to their loved one, it gives them healing. Other people might come that have lost someone 20 years ago, so they're not in the throes of grief. They might miss the person, but they're not dealing with the initial grief. So in that aspect, it could be that their mother left here and didn't get to say goodbye to them, or there was some element to their family background that needed talked about, or there could have been an apology coming from the mother or father in spirit for something that happened when they were here, and then that in turn gives that person their healing. So mediumship is always to heal. A medium will always work to the highest power of healing, first and foremost, but that healing comes in different ways. So like I've just described, it could be different for one person than the next. But the biggest thing I think for me watching this and knowing what it brings is just an upliftment. It's so enlightening to watch. And you could have someone sitting with you while you do the reading and they're so traumatized by someone's passing that they don't know how they're going to get out their bed the next day. They don't know how to put one foot in front of the other. And so it's a highly responsible position as well. And you're dealing with very vulnerable people in all aspects, whether it's mediumship or whether someone's coming for guidance for their own life. people are vulnerable in that moment. They're trusting you, they're looking for answers, or they're looking for that connection. So I think as a medium, we have to understand that it's a really responsible position to be in. It's a very rewarding one. It's one where there's not a day goes by that I don't thank Spirit for allowing me to be part of that healing process in some level, and to help navigate that for the person and help them go forward. But I think for every person that has come for a reading over all the years that I've done it, there's definitely 9 times out of 10 they've come back and said, oh, it was so healing, or it was so uplifting, or it changed my life. And that's not about me it's not about me changing someone's life. It's about the experience of what took place changing that person's life.
That's beautiful. Have you ever encountered a person that you could not read for?
I haven't encountered someone I couldn't read for, but I have encountered only, and maybe I've been really lucky, but maybe only a handful of times over the thousands upon thousands of readings I've done, I have encountered someone that's been a bit more difficult. So one example stands out for me. A lady came to see me, and as soon as she came in, she kind of threw her coat and her bag down to the side and folded her arms and looked at me as if, right, come on then.
Prove it.
And it was almost a challenge. Yeah, it was almost right away. It was well, do what you say you can do, that kind of thing. Now, I didn't mind, because people, you don't know what their background is. You don't know what they've went through. You don't know any of that until you sit with them and talk to them. So I don't even mind if that happens, because I, again, trust Spirit. So I know it'll be okay. But when she done it, I did feel like, I'm not sure she's going to accept whatever comes, but we'll give it a go. So our father was in spirit, and he came in straight away, and the evidence I gave her, she said yes, and she confirmed it was her father, and it all made sense. Then she started to say, no, that doesn't make sense, and I'm not sure about that, which again I welcome, because there has to be an honesty within mediumship, that mediums are never going to be 100% correct. We wish that we were, but that's not the case,
right?
Because it's open to interpretation. However, I knew what I was getting that day, and I knew that she just wasn't really quite willing to be as open as maybe she thought she was. So anyway, I said to her after about 15 minutes, look, this isn't going to work today, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you tickets to an event that I'm doing tomorrow night. And she kind of looked at me and said, well, I don't really want the tickets. If you couldn't read for me now, then I don't want to come. And I said, that's absolutely fine, but I'm not, number one, you're paying for a service, and I'm not taking money for a service that you're not going to feel satisfied with. And also, I just feel that from my perspective as the medium, this isn't working. So it is my right to say, I'm not going to go forward with this today, but I'll give you these tickets. So anyway, she took them, and she wasn't happy, and that didn't make me feel good, because obviously I want to please people and make sure they get what they come for. But I was kind of resolute in how I felt. I knew what had taken place. So anyway, she did come to the event, and her father came through 100 times stronger and brought much newer evidence, more evidence, and it was so amazing the way that he came through. And she was absolutely overjoyed, and she was crying, and she couldn't believe it. And she came up at the end and she said, why did that not happen when I came to see you? And I said, because you weren't allowing it to take place. You wanted answers in the first 5 minutes. You have to allow a reading to build. You have to allow the evidence to build, the connection to build. But because you had made your mind up that you weren't receiving that fast enough, or whatever it might have been, you weren't open. So she went away happy in the end, and I spoke to her at length about it all, and she was satisfied with everything. But again, it shows that as humans, we want answers the way we want them. And within mediumship, that can't happen. You will always get what you need, not what you want.
Right,
you'll get
right.
what your soul needs. You'll not always get what you want. I can't tell you the amount of times people have asked a specific question. At the end of a session, I'll say, do you have any questions? Yeah, what was my mother's name? And I'll say, well, I didn't get it through my mediumship, so it's just not come through. Because the minute a medium goes to start looking for that information, their own mind is going to throw names left, right, and centre. So everything has to happen through the mediumship. And I think if people remember that, it gives them a much better experience.
No, that's a really great example. It's a really great example. I part of me asking was I've had some really cool experiences with psychics. I've never been to a medium. Oh, I did go to one medium and he wasn't hitting anything. But then I also wonder too if I'm hard to read for because I've had a lot of experiences going to people and they end up reading themselves is what it seemed like. And I wondered if it's because of the nature of the boundary I've had to be able to do my work.
It could be a little, but to be honest, and this is me kind of just putting this out there, and some people will agree and some will disagree, but I feel like it's the medium's job to do the reading. So there's not anyone where I would say in the past that I've had to, like I just said, that I've had to say, no, I can't read for you. I've explained, like I did to that lady, this is why this is happening today. But I knew that ultimately she would get that connection.
Right.
If, say it was you that had come in for a reading with me and I felt like there was a wall there or a little bit of a boundary there, then it would be up to me as the medium to say, you know this, I'm going to work this certain way today, or let's just relax for 10 minutes. Let's just chat about the weather or whatever stuff that I'm not going to be able to find out about your life, and just build that connection. I think that mediums sometimes, you know, we have to accept as mediums that we're not going to be able to just switch on all the time. Some days it's going to be harder. It depends what's going on in the medium's life. If the medium, like when I lost my mother to spirit 7 years ago, it was tough to go back to work. It was tough to kind of remove that from my own mind in order to allow everything else to come in. So mediums can have bad days and good days as well. And I think if you've gone to different mediums and they've not been able to read for you, I don't think you should take that upon yourself to say that it's because you're difficult or there's a boundary or there's a wall. I think it's more about the medium. And my grandmother used to say, who incidentally I later found out was very mediumistic, but she used to say there's a different medium for everyone. So it might just be that you haven't found the medium that's able to link with you. Yeah.
No, I just thought it was interesting because I was getting really cool readings. And I didn't do it a lot, but really cool readings until a certain point. And then when I discovered what they were saying, it seemed to have more of an impact on their personal lives. Like it almost like there was a mirror that they were seeing.
But that can happen. That can happen. When you read, I remember when I went through a divorce, and when I went through my divorce, I swear every single person that came to see me, it was about a divorce. It was about a marriage separation. It was about, because really you're going to kind of, there has to be that mirror effect. And sometimes I think that's about the medium receiving healing at the same time. So words that I would use for the person to give them that guidance from their loved ones to get them through that situation, I could hear myself saying that. So then in turn, it helped me as well. So sometimes it can be a little bit like that, where there is that kind of reflection almost, or a very similar path in life at certain times. And I just think that that's more about the medium, I suppose, meeting with people who they would be able to understand, because if you've been through something, you understand it so much more.
Right.
So I think that as a medium, you're going to do that anyway.
No, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so what about ethics around reading for someone who hasn't asked for it? Like if you're out at the grocery store and you start perceiving maybe the cashier, their loved one, what would you do with that information?
I wouldn't do anything with that. There is serious ethics about that, or at least there should be. And unfortunately, there isn't always. So this can happen. But what you have to realize is that you can do someone more damage with what you say. Like, for instance, if I seen someone in the grocery store and picked up information, I could pass that on to that person. But how do I know what that person's background is? How do I know what their belief system is? How do I know that person I'm bringing through for them or giving them that evidence, how do I know they even had a good relationship with that person? So in that moment, you can't just pass that on. There are times, again, I have another example of this. There's been times where I've picked things up, like at a concert venue. I remember being at a concert venue and I could feel straight away the woman in front of me. I felt like her husband was standing beside me, and I was saying to him in my mind, I can't pass any of this information on. He was telling me that he had to get his leg amputated before he passed. He was diabetic and all the things that happened to him. And I was saying to him, I'm so sorry, I can't pass this on. We were in a concert venue. There's no way I could have stopped that woman and said, by the way, I have your husband here. So I couldn't do it. But the fact that he came in, it wasn't because, you know, I wouldn't be letting him down by not passing that on, because he would know that I couldn't pass that on. But he knew I was a medium. He could see that I would feel him or make that connection. So he was there. He was excited. His wife was there and all the rest of it. Another example I've got where I did pass it on was on a train when I was working down in England, and I live in Scotland. So I was traveling by train, and a lady sat at my table. And as soon as she sat down, I felt her husband come in. And I was saying to him again in my mind, I can't pass anything on. And he told me her name. He said her name was Margaret. He said that he had not long passed away and that she was up in Scotland sorting things out. They owned a bar together. He told me everything. And the whole time in my mind, I was saying, I don't know why you're telling me this. I can't pass this on. So then I ended up saying to him, well, if your wife is open to this, you need to somehow make her ask me about this. So I left it. I went to the shop on the train. I came back. I sat down and she said to me, oh, I need to go to the shop. Will you watch my belongings? I said, yes, fine. She went, she came back and she said, so where are you going today? And I said, oh, I'm traveling for work. What do you do? I said, I'm a medium. And she said, oh, I love all of that. I love mediumship. I love all of that. And I said, okay. I said, now I'm just going to say to you that I know your husband's in spirit. I said, and he's been here the whole time. And she said, she looked shocked, but she said, okay. And she was very open to it. And I said, your name's Margaret, isn't it? And then she looked really shocked. And then she was like, yes.
Yeah, I bet.
Then I relayed all the information and it was all correct. And by the time she got off the train before me. She said, thank you so much. That this has, and he'd only died 6 weeks before that. And she said, that has done so much for me. So in that moment, I thanked him, but I also thanked my guides because it was all that was needed. That for the reason that she needed it was needed in that moment. They seen the opportunity and they brought that about. But that's not a normal thing to do.
Right,
Definitely
right.
not.
Yeah, I think that was very clever of you to say, hey, if you can set it up so that she invites me rather than me inviting myself.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. Yeah. Huh.
It's an ethical thing. You know, you can't pry into someone's private life without them asking you to do that. You shouldn't ever feel the need to just walk up to a stranger and say, hey, I'm a medium and I'm getting this information for you. It's not something that is correct ethically or morally, actually.
No, I agree 100%. I think the Hollywood version, you know how some mediums have shows and they will reflect that behavior. They'll show that, although we don't know if it's set up ahead of time.
Well, the thing about those shows are that, say someone walks into a shop and starts reading for the person behind the desk. Well, that's set up because there's cameras already in there. Everything's already set up. Sound set up, you know, everything's set up. So we know that those are set up.
Right.
But to someone who's not thinking like that, they are going to believe what they see on TV. So they're going to think that that's the way it's done. So it's all production, isn't it? And that doesn't mean that the mediums aren't good at what they do. It just means that for the purposes of the TV and the show and everything else, they want to do it that way. And I think, you know, I always loved John Edward. John Edward was one of the mediums, the very first mediums, I suppose, that I watched on TV years before I even looked at this or knew I was a medium. And he inspired me so much. And I just, anything that he said, I already seemed to know that and understood it, and it resonated with me. So I always watched him. And the one thing that I would say about someone like him is that it wasn't an overly produced show. It was him standing there doing gallery readings, and what happened. And I've also seen him live, and he has his group evolve, and everything's live, and you can see that he's a genuine medium, which is different to some other shows that are overly produced. And mediumship is in the moment, and it should be in the moment, rather than all like action, camera action, all of that.
Doesn't always make for as good a TV as someone just
It
popping into
doesn't.
a shop and like, hey, your grandmother is with me right now.
Yeah, and it is a shame in a way, because some of these mediums that you see are so gifted, and there's others that maybe aren't so much, but that's life. Well, you're always going to have that in whatever walk of life you're in. But there are some really gifted mediums that do that because they probably feel like they want to get the word of spirit out. They want to kind of appeal to as many people as they possibly can. And I understand that, because when you're working for spirit, you do want to help as many people as you can help. So I think there's a side where it's not always about the medium that's wrong for doing something like that. But if you strip it back, I think that within mediumship itself, and as a natural medium, the most important thing is to follow spirit. And so for me, I'll go wherever spirit asks me to go, but I would always know if something sat with me or if it didn't.
Right. You've had a long time to really develop that relationship with the spirit world and with your allies on the other side. I mean, and that's a big part of it. A lot of what you're talking about, sounds to me, is discipline, right? Is really honing your craft.
Mm-hmm. It definitely is, and it's an ongoing thing. I mean, as much as I work with this all the time, full time, every day almost, it's something that I need to put time aside for to continue to develop. My development will come through my work because of what I do and the way that I do it. But that doesn't mean that I don't need to go and meditate. That doesn't mean that I don't need to sit and speak with my guides and my helpers to develop what I'm doing or what I'm trying to do with my mediumship. So it's any medium will know it's an ongoing thing. You've never arrived at a certain point. You're always looking to further enhance your ability or to try and help in a different way, because that is what spirit want. And your mediumship changes over the years as well. So you've continually got to stay in touch with that aspect. And on top of that, I need that. As Karen, I need that time to sit with my spirit team and just relax. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're giving me guidance at that moment or telling me which way to go or looking for development. It could just be that I need that hour to just sit and be with spirit and not be working for clients and everything else, because that is part of my development too.
That's a really good point, is to spend leisure time with your allies. I actually had never thought of that. That's very cool. I like that.
I remember when I was moving house one time, and I was so stressed with the house move. We all know that the house moving is stressful. And I remember saying to my husband at the time, all I want is 5 minutes to go and speak to spirit. That's all I want. I just want to feel normal. And I remember him saying to me, that's actually not normal. To want to go and
Ooh.
speak to and I said, it's my normal. It's who, and it
And
feels
I want a
like that.
divorce. I'm
Well,
just
that
kidding.
came, didn't it? No, that happened. Not saying it happened in that moment, but it did happen.
Yeah, I'm just teasing. Yeah.
But yeah, no. It's actually so correct. But the point is, if you're a medium, you're a medium, and you need that connection to spirit. And when I don't have that, like even if I go off on holiday, which I love, I'll say, right, I'm taking 10 days off and I need this time just for me, and or going with the kids or whatever it might be. Even in that 10 days, I'll be like, I need to kind of have a wee word or go and talk to them, or because you
I
need,
miss them. Yeah.
yeah, you do miss it. You miss it a lot.
I love that. So you are actively teaching. You're teaching folks how to access their intuitive sides, to be mediums, or just to be psychic, or both?
Both. For both. I have a mentorship that's continually going on. But mentorship for me means exactly that, mentorship, one-to-one mentorship, because I found that in the early days, although I had that little home circle that I started in, when I came out of that, to me, there were hardly any teachers that things resonated with me. And so I found it difficult to kind of go and find that. And I looked all over the world, and I found maybe 4 or 5 great teachers that I felt spoke the language that I needed them to speak for my development, but I didn't have a one-to-one communication with them. It was more courses and attending things. So I knew then that I will develop a mentorship where people have got time with me to ask questions, for me to guide them personally, because I think it's important that we have the right people out there working for spirit or working with their mediumship, or even if it's psychic development for themselves and it's not even about them going out and doing it for work, I still feel it's very important for them to receive the right information. So I developed a mentorship, and I actively take students on. I only take on so many, because obviously if I'm giving them one-to-one time, then I've only got a certain amount of time to do that. But aside of that, I also have courses on my website and things as well that people can go on to and do at home, where it's still me doing videos and things, but it's not an active one-to-one mentorship. So I think there's something for everyone, because sometimes people want to develop their own psychic ability, but they don't necessarily want to develop it to a degree where they're needing to speak with me monthly. So there's something for everyone.
Gotcha. And are you actively reading for people as well?
Yes, I sure am. Yeah, that never stops. That's something that I do. I do that every week. I know, and I understand why you're asking, because sometimes I look at my diary at the start of a week and think, oh wow, I've got all of this to get through. But you get there, and I don't ever want to not do my readings for people, because it helps so many people in that respect. But I love my teaching as well, and I also demonstrate my mediumship at events, small intimate events, larger events. So I do a bit of everything, really.
And you are working with people internationally?
Yes. A lot of my clients are based all over. So Australia, America, UK, Canada, Japan, they're from all over the globe. So there's not really a barrier, because we can do everything online, which is wonderful in so many ways. There's no barrier to where my clients are based.
Okay. And how do folks find you?
So they can go to karenpsychic.com. Everything's on there. You can subscribe to that website. I like to reassure people at this point that you will not be bombarded with lots of marketing and things like that. It really is just a way for me to keep in touch with people, or let people know once a month what's up and coming, whether it's events, because obviously I work in the States as well, so there's stuff going on there too. So I let people know ahead of time what's going on. I do Facebook Lives, I do seminars online. So that would, if you subscribe to karenpsychic.com, you would be notified of anything that was coming up as well. And to that point, if anyone wants to book a reading or book the mentorship or look at courses, they can, if they subscribe, they will be able to do that as well.
Okay. So I want to thank you very, very much for coming on and chatting with me. This was a whole lot of fun for me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that podcasts and things like this are another amazing way to get the word out there, and a standard of mediumship. I think for me it's about getting the standard of mediumship out there, or the ethics out there too, and the respect for spirit and how wonderful it really is.
Well said.
Yeah, so thank you so much for allowing me to come on.
Absolutely. No, it was my pleasure. If you've never had one, a reading with a genuine psychic or a medium or a psychic medium can be a very powerful thing, in some cases life-changing. If you'd like to learn more about Karen's readings or mentorships, please check out her website. I put a link in the show notes. Thanks for hanging out with me at the Lucid Cafe, and a big thank you to Joanne for her donation to the podcast. Your support, no matter what form it takes, means the world to me, so thank you so very much. Because of the time speeding up thing, I'll be back in a few minutes with another thought-provoking episode. Until next time.